Here's the agenda that I want to follow with you. A little bit of where is the college? Because I know some of you are deeply involved and others maybe haven't come to the region recently. You're not as familiar. You might say, well, I know main campus, but isn't that it? So I'll share a little bit more in that regard. And then grounding us in the mission. Why do we exist? What are we here for? And then also, who makes up the college, to give you a sense of the people who provide the teaching and learning. And the what and how question. What do we do and how do we do it? And to do that, I'm going to tell you some of our challenges, some of the trends that are happening in higher ed. And it's not a happy story, but I promise that I'll finish with a happy ending because we've got a strategic plan in place that's going to help us work through those challenges. And lastly, let you see some of the places that we're innovating, what's on the horizon. So that's the agenda that I'll follow with you. To that first question of where are we, you're probably familiar. 4 campuses. We've got the main campus, we've got the Great Lakes campus, the Aero Park, and the University Center. I'll give you a quick sort of visual tour to remind you. So thinking of those 4 campuses, they're at the base of Old Mission Peninsula is the main campus in the center. If you go over onto West Bay, you have the Great Lakes campus at the base of West Bay. And over on East Bay, or just south of East Bay, the Aero Park campus. And then down on Boardman Lake, you have the University Center. So you can see we're not just a single campus, but there's literally 4 campuses spread throughout this community. You might be familiar when you think about main campus, everyone sort of has nostalgia for the under the pines, the beautiful location, and the great trees on campus. Or maybe you've been to the Denos and around the Denos Museum. Maybe also on main campus, you're surely familiar if you've been to main campus with that Bauhaus-designed Walter Gropius Fine Arts building, or the building that we've just opened in the last couple years of the new Timothy J. Nelson Innovation Center. If you make it to the Great Lakes campus, you know there we've got the Haggerty Center. You may have been there for events, maybe weddings or other things, but also our Maritime Academy and our culinary programs are there. But what you're probably most familiar with when you go to that campus is out back, where you've got the state of Michigan, our training ship for the maritime program, and the ships that fill the harbor there. Over at the Aero Park campus, all of our technical programs, everything from welding and carpentry to the engineering technologies, and our aviation program, where you'll find our 17 planes, and right now a 100-person waiting list of students wanting to get in to that program. I'll say a little bit more about that in a bit. And then, of course, lastly, down to the University Center and that beautiful new view of the Tart Trail as it cuts across Boardman and completes the loop. And many of you are familiar and may have been graduates of the University Center. That notion of start here, stay here, that maybe you've started your first 2 years with a college and you can actually stay here and finish those last 2 years with one of the University Center partners. So a quick kind of tour of where are we. But to that question of why do we exist? We've got, I believe, an incredibly profound mission. Our mission is about delivering lifelong learning opportunities to transform lives and enrich our community. That's really important when you think about deliver lifelong learning opportunities. Typically, 4-year institutions deliver 4-year learning opportunities. Ours is lifelong. You probably have kids, if not yourself, have participated in College for Kids, often that 5 to 15 sort of year age group. Maybe you were here for a certificate, an associate's degree, even the bachelor's degrees that we offer if you're not familiar. But again, that's just in the middle. All of that extended education, which many of you I know participate in as well as older adults who come back. So again, it's lifelong learning opportunities. But to what end? To transform lives and enrich our community. So again, unlike many 4-year institutions that, might transform lives, they don't have that demand to make sure that they're also benefiting the community. Community colleges do, and NMC lives in to that expectation that we're also enriching our community. And I'll say more about that. In terms of that idea of we deliver lifelong learning opportunities, Let me give you a sense of what we do in that regard. You may not be familiar. We have about 3,300 for-credit students, the students who you traditionally think of pursuing an associate's, a bachelor's, or a certificate degree. But we also have 5,400 non-credit students, those students who aren't looking to earn a degree, but maybe it's some sort of extended ed or other programming that they're exploring. And again, as I mentioned, you're surely familiar that we have associate's degrees, but you might not be familiar with the bachelor's degrees. We do offer 2 bachelor's degrees, our maritime program as well as our marine technology. As I mentioned, everything from certificates to micro-credentials to dual enrollment and early college as well. And you probably are familiar, things like the University Center, the Denos Museum, our International Affairs Forum, College for Kids, and even the Rogers Observatory. And another piece that I should mention is the online classes. We're surely a community college and we want people to come to campus, but you know in the last 2 years the world shifted. Pre-pandemic, we had about 15% of our courses online. That was a trend that all colleges were moving towards, and it took us decades to get to that point. But during the pandemic, that 15%, remember, swung over to 100%. And now it's swung back to about 30%. So think of that. In the last 2 years, we've doubled the number of online classes. Not because we're trying to do that, but because our students are demanding it. Higher ed is changing dramatically, and the pandemic has only exacerbated that. So that idea of the growing online presence is going to be with us for some time. When you think about the size of the college, I feel like I have to throw this in because this is the economics club. We're about a $50 million enterprise. We also have a $50 million foundation, and our assets combined are in that $120 million range. So we're a very large institution. If we're about delivering lifelong learning opportunities to transform lives, I want to give you just one short story that paints a picture, and it's a singular story, but I think you can extrapolate this to any of our staff, any of our faculty, and any of you as as supporters of the college. You might recognize that guy, Glenn Wolfe, one of our arts faculty. 2 Decembers ago, we were coming out of COVID, so we thought, and things started to get bad again, and we thought we might have to come back in January in some type of a controlled way again. I remember at the end of December seeing Glenn in the Fine Arts building, and his shoulders were slumped, and I could tell he was dejected. And he said, "Nick, I'm supposed to teach printmaking in January." And he said, "If we go online, I can't teach printmaking." He was obviously upset. He wanted to connect with students again. It looked like he wasn't going to be able to. But as we talked, I could see kind of life come into him and his shoulders lift. And he said, "But I've got an idea." I said, "What?" And he said, No, I don't want to tell you yet." And I said, "Well, come on, Glenn." He said, No, I'm working on it." So January 3rd, we came back, and the first place I went was down to the arts building. And I opened the door, and Glenn came bounding towards me, those shoulders lifted high, smile on his face. And he said, "Look, I did it." And I said, "You did what?" I couldn't tell what was in his hand. He was holding this thing that you see in his hand and to the right, and you probably can't tell what it is. He said, "Nick, I found open-sourced plans on the internet to 3D print mini printing presses." He said, "I've already talked with Tattle. They're going to be able to print them for us. I've talked with our engineering faculty and our engineering students. They're going to work on it as a project." And he said, "It's $23.50 a printing press." He said, "I can get these out to all of our students, and they're still going to be able to take printmaking." That's the kind of passion and excitement that I've seen through the pandemic and that I know has always existed at the college. Whether a faculty member, a staff member, a community member, people go above and beyond because they're there to serve our students, to deliver lifelong learning opportunities, to transform lives and enrich our community. To that point of enrich our community, you may not be familiar. We have 650 full-time and part-time employees at the college, about a $34 million payroll. And the college buys purchase services to the tune of about $22 million. That's $22 million that goes back into the community. Most importantly, those people who come to NMC to pursue their associate's degrees on average earn $8,500 per year more than someone with just a high school degree. So it's obviously a tremendously good investment. And if you look at that over the lifetime of someone who's earned that associate's degree, that $8,500 times the lifetime working, about $272,000 over their lifetime. It's a tremendously valuable ROI. You know this just by me asking that question up front. Well, who are NMC grads? They're the people who are in this room. As alums, you're our neighbors, you're our friends, you're our nurses, you're our pilots, you're the construction trades workers, you're the people sitting here. NMC alums are all throughout this town and region. In terms of the who, I touched on much of this already, but I do want to say something specifically about the University Center, because not many people realize this. Over the last 25 years, and we just celebrated a couple years ago our 25th anniversary of the University Center, the University Center has granted over 9,000 degrees. When I first got here, a lot of people were coming up to me with, great new ideas. And a lot of those that I heard were, what Traverse City needs is a bachelor's degree granting college. I thought, well, we've got it. And not only do we got it, it's produced over 9,000 degrees and graduates in this community. We need to be proud of that and hold that up higher. They may not be NMC specific degrees, but they're coming from all of those university partners who do things better than us in some ways because they've got specific expertise in nursing and social work in whatever those degrees are that they're offering. I think we can be very proud of that University Center partnership. I'm not going to go through this list, but I want you to take a look at it. In terms of what does NMC do? And I tried to hone this down to say, what do we do that's unique compared to other community colleges, compared to other colleges? You know many of the things on this list, but when you look at it, I think we can be really proud. We've got a museum. We've got a university center. We've got a child care center on site. We offer extended ed. We've got unique programs like the Police Academy. We've got the only aviation training program in a community college in the state. Western, obviously, offering a 4-year degree. But you look through that, and there's a whole lot to be proud of there. And down at the bottom, the NMC Foundation. I'm going to say more about that in a moment. But how do we do it? I want to shift and tell you a little bit about the trends that we're facing. Some of you might be familiar with these, and others, it's going to be a little jaw-dropping because the world is changing dramatically out there in terms of higher ed. And I'm going to tell you what those challenges mean to us and how we're responding, particularly in terms of our strategic plan, how we're innovating to meet those challenges. But in the end, what you're going to hear from me is we're going to remain community-centered and community-serving. You may not know that specific language, but when I interviewed over 3.5 years ago, I did some research in the archives online, and I found the first brochure for the college back in 1951, and it had a tagline of sorts. I'm not sure we used that language back then, but it had a title to it. And the title or the tagline were those words, community-centered, community-serving. So on the year that the college opened, that was the vision. And I thought, wow, that's who we are 71 years later. We've lived into that vision, community-centered, community-serving. I'm going to tell you just 4 quick trends here and a little bit about how we're approaching them. The shift in higher education funding. Here's the punchline. This is a little hard to see. 2003 versus 2022, about 20 years spread. 20 years ago, we had a property tax that's about the same as now, accounting for about 25 or 27% of the revenue of the college. Of course, that's not going to change a whole lot because it's tied to millage. But state aid, or our state appropriation, as you can see, has declined by 11% over those 20 years. That's dramatic. Can you imagine your business losing that much of its resources over a 20-year period? The only other lever that we can pull on is tuition. And obviously, you don't want to raise tuition at the expense of students, but we've had to over those 20 years to the tune of about 8%. That still means we're down 3% over 20 years ago. So this idea of state appropriation keeps declining year over year, and there's no sign that that's going to change. Now remember I said there's one lever in that three-legged stool that we can impact, which is tuition. Well, let me share with you, this is a report from earlier this year, and they asked 18 to 30-year-olds who didn't head off to college, what are the key barriers to college? The number one, it's too expensive. So if your solution to that challenge before was, well, Nick, you just got to raise tuition, no, you can't. It's the number one barrier. But we are incredibly fortunate, and I know that in the room today we have some of our foundation board members. I know some of you historically have served as foundation board members. Many of you are supporters in terms of your donations to the college and obviously through the foundation. So I definitely want to hold up the foundation for a moment and share this with you. You may not be aware of this, but 41% of all undergraduates in the country attend a two-year institution, a community college. So think of that, almost half of undergraduates attend a two-year college. However, only 1.5% of all higher ed giving is directed towards community colleges. We hear about these billion-dollar endowments at big universities, maybe universities that you've attended, but only that 1.5% of giving goes to community colleges, despite the fact that 50% of the students are getting educated at community college. And nationally, only 5.5% of community college students receive institutional aid from their college. That number at NMC is 30%, 6 times more than the national average. That's because we have a strong foundation that for decades has relied on the generosity of folks like you as graduates, as community members who recognize the value of the college and are willing to support it. That in turn supports our students so that this education is accessible to them. In fact, it's to the tune of almost $1.3 million a year that the foundation gives in terms of scholarships for our students. The second trend is that the pandemic has definitely exacerbated people's view of there isn't a return on my investment for a higher ed investment, whether 4 years or 2 years. That's the thinking of many students and parents and others today. And how that's playing out for us is this way. There was a report this year that came out in May, and it said that just 51% of today's teenagers want to pursue a 4-year degree. And that's down from 71% pre-pandemic. So over the pandemic, 20% decline in people thinking that a 4-year education is something that's going to be valuable to them. And in fact, that second point, only 16% believe that a 4-year degree is going to prepare them for a well-paying job. That's a crisis. That's a real crisis that we're facing in terms of people's view of what's the value of higher education. In fact, just this summer, the Hechinger report came out. It said that America's faith in higher ed has dropped more than their confidence in any other institution. So again, greater than any other institution. This is what we're facing with in terms of this concern about ROI. If you look at this, again, they asked these 18 to 30-year-olds who didn't go to college, what's holding you back? And they asked them, well, what is valuable education and training options? Number 7 on the list was a 2-year degree. And look at number 8, YouTube. 18 to 30-year-olds believe they're going to get more out of YouTube, well, just slightly more out of a 2-year degree than they would out of the 2-year degree. That's the reality of the landscape we're dealing with that has shifted so dramatically over these last 2 to 3 years. How are we countering that? For example, many of you have probably heard of the Maritime Culinary Program that we've just launched. Bringing together, how do you make sure that people on board ships, those big Lakers out there, are getting fed? And when we took this to the CEOs of the shipping companies, we had all kinds of data and whatnot prepared because we thought, these CEOs would really want to know the data. And they said, you don't need to show us the data. They said, we know there's a direct line between productivity and well-fed employees. They said, yeah, get us better cooks on board. That's going to help us. So those are the kinds of things that we're pursuing as a college, working directly with employers, trying to figure out what they need. And it's a one-year certificate. Because remember, we're competing with a student who's thinking YouTube is a better idea than a 2-year degree. So we have to figure out how do we get them those skills in a quicker time frame. The third trend about aligning higher ed and workforce needs, I'm just going to give you a concrete example of something the college is doing. You're probably familiar with our bachelor's degree in marine technology. This year, it was ranked the 4th best marine engineering program in the country, behind Annapolis, or the U.S. Naval Academy, the University of Rhode Island, and the University of Florida. And then, oh yeah, this 2-year college in Northern Michigan, NMC. Yeah. And the thing that's even more impressive, since that program has been founded, 100% job placement. And most of those students are coming out $70,000, $80,000 a year. They're working from Indonesia to Alaska to right here in our own backyard. But again, that focus on trying to meet workforce needs. As I start to wrap up here, this 4th trend is the boogeyman. This is the big one, changing student enrollments. And there's some real jaw-dropping stats here. Pre-pandemic, so 2019, 2020 to today, just these last 2 to 3 years, there are now 1.3 million fewer students in higher ed in this country. Students walked away during the pandemic, and they're not walking back. So there is a tremendous sort of fallout from the pandemic, having lost 1.3 million students who walked away from that. And in fact, Michigan is number 1. And it's not the number 1 place that you want to be in. Maybe it's the last place. That we have had the largest decline of any state. 15.5% of our students in higher ed in this state makes us the worst of any in the country. Specifically, let me share this with you. You don't have to be as concerned with the numbers, but you can see that graph's going in the wrong way. Over on the left is our fiscal year 2010. So in other words, about 10 years ago, looking out to the present, to this fiscal year. We've had about a 43% decline over the last 12 to 13 years in our enrollment, or specifically our credit hours. And it isn't about mismanagement. It isn't about anything that the college has done wrong. It's mostly because of demographics. And I'll share with you some of those demographics in a moment. But right here in Grand Traverse County, only about 53% of high school graduates are enrolling in college. That number 5 years ago or 7 years ago in 2015 was 66%. A 13% decline in the last 7 years of our local students right here in Grand Traverse County saying, I don't think I need to go to college. Some of those factors, particularly the demographic factors, these are, again, probably hard to fathom. 18 to 25-year-olds are declining. It's just a demographic reality, and that isn't predicted to turn until 2025. So at least in the relatively near future, we know that's going to shift. But here's the really tough one. The declining number of high school graduates isn't going to turn around until 2031. So we've got a long time to go until that shifts. Also, in the last 10 years, we've had a 47% drop in the over 21-year-olds at the college. That's mostly because, remember, 10, 15 years ago was the recession. There were a lot of older adults coming back to reskill. And now, because we've got relatively low unemployment, they're not coming back. And the last one, declining college attendance, which I just shared with you. I do want to give you just one bit of legislative insight here because I think it's something we really need to be proud of, particularly our Northern Michigan legislators, regardless of what your politics are. Our legislators stepped up for us and the governor stepped up. During the pandemic, there were 4 key policy initiatives that have helped us tremendously, not just us, but higher ed and specifically community colleges. You're probably familiar with the Reconnect program. You may have benefited, your kids or someone in your community has surely benefited because over 400 students have come to us through the Reconnect program, which says any student 25 and above can come back for free community college at in-district rate. In other words, it's providing free community college to older adults. And that has brought, as I said, 400 students back to us and about $562,000 of tuition revenue. The Future for Frontliners was started literally because of those people who helped us during the pandemic, who stood behind the counters and served us during lockdown. The governor created an initiative kind of like the GI Bill that said because you served during that time, you should be rewarded. And the reward was college education. We've gotten about 530 students who brought with them about $1.3 million of tuition to us. And this year, still to come, at the end of this school year, or this academic year, there's another new scholarship that's being introduced called the Achievement Scholarship. If you're a community college student, you will qualify for $1,750 for 3 years. It's an outright grant or scholarship. It's not a loan. So students will have $1,750 more to help put towards their tuition. We're estimating or forecasting that's going to bring us about 200 more students and about $400,000. When you think about those enrollment challenges, I'll give you one example. Well, what's the college doing to counter that? We've got a number of programs, new programs that we're initiating. One is growth of our aviation program. We've got a 100 student waiting list. We've got a plan to buy 4 new planes at about $500,000 apiece and build new hangar space, which because of this weather, you can't have them outside, right? They need to be under roof. About a $7 million investment, but it's going to help us grow the enrollment of the aviation program. Those are the kinds of examples of things we're doing, growing new programs, growing old programs, bringing more students in to counter those enrollment trends. And we're doing that because we have a strategic plan. You have the cheat sheet kind of document in front of you. I'm not going to say anything other than this. There's 5 strategies. Those 5 strategies have 24 objectives, and those 24 objectives have 142 action plans. I share that because what you hopefully take away from it, this plan isn't in a 3-ring binder collecting dust on a shelf. This is including everyone in the college, every faculty member, every staff member, and many of you are involved in these teams. 142 teams that are laser focused on how do we defeat those trends. And that's what the college is up to right now. We're also doing a fair bit of innovating. We have a new Office of Possibilities. And if you think about the shorthand for the Office of Possibilities, oops, yeah. And it's deliberate, right? Because you know this as economics club members. To have innovation, you got to take risk. And to take risk means you're going to fail. And we got to encourage that culture of failure because we got to continue to innovate new programs, new ideas to grow and diversify our revenue streams at the college. You probably have seen the ticker articles recently about the new Freshwater Research and Innovation Center, probably about a $60 million undertaking. It's a vision, it's a bold vision, but we're beginning to work with that with partners like Michigan Tech, like 20 Fathoms, like Traverse Connect and others. The idea being, how do we leverage this #1 asset of ours, this blue economy, the Great Lakes, and how do we begin to build a new blue economy that isn't 100% reliant on tourism, but begins to diversify things for us? That's this great economic development initiative that we're part of. Yes, indeed, we're looking ahead. We're looking to the future, but you've probably heard that saying before that you can't drive a car looking out the rearview mirror, right? But a rearview mirror comes in handy. I'm going to tell you why we are at least glancing in the rearview mirror. because we've got a proud history. Many of you are probably familiar with the ship, the Allegheny, that predates the state of Michigan, our training ship for the Maritime Academy. And that story of Les Biederman making a trip to Philadelphia to pick that ship up and bring it back here to Traverse City. But what I love about that story is that bold vision of Les Biederman. His vision was to create a floating university. And you can just imagine the laughter that must have been around when he talked about that. What are you talking about, Les? You can't have a floating university, right? But that's what the Maritime Academy is. In many ways, it's a floating classroom. And it's that type of bold vision that we're going to continue to carry forward. So yeah, we're looking ahead, but we're going to be looking back and pulling on that vision of Les Biederman and others. Also, you're probably familiar with these images because you know that the college didn't begin where our campus is today, but it began at the airport. And what I love about these images, you see students literally putting up the sign for the college on an old airport building. And in the top, you see them carrying things out of that building to move to the new campus. We didn't hire a company. Students rolled up their sleeves. They put the sign up, they moved the things. It was students, it was faculty, it was staff. And I think it's that DNA that we're all so proud of, that we're all willing to roll up our sleeves to do what we got to do to get her done, right? That's the philosophy around the college. And the last thing I'll say, this was a photograph when Les Biederman went to Philadelphia to pick up the Allegheny. You may or may not be familiar. They estimate that about a ton of fudge was made by people in the community. Les put the call out to people in the community. He said, I want everyone to make some fudge. And probably the equivalent of a U-Haul was filled with a ton of fudge. Because he said, when I get to Philadelphia to pick up the ship, I'm just not going to pick up the ship. He said, we're going to go visit the war hospital. And they went and visited vets. And he took that ton of fudge into the hospital with the Cherry Queen and other people and said, you know what, we're here to pick up a ship, but we're here to say we care about you as well. I thought, isn't that so true of who we are as a community? And that spirit of Les Biederman that's obviously infused you, because you care deeply about the college, we're going to continue that idea of being community-minded.